our first session this morning, we're going to hear from Michelle Goff and Mariko Early. Michelle Goff lives in Searcy, Arkansas, and is the founder and director of Iron Rose Sister Ministries, which equips women to connect with God and one another more deeply in English, Spanish, and bilingual contexts across the Americas. An author and speaker in both languages, she likes to call Spanish her nerdy passion and God her first one. Michelle has been in full-time ministry for 20 years in various contexts: campus ministry, church plants in the United States and Latin America, and of course in women's ministry. She was a missionary to Caracas, Venezuela, and has spoken at many events across Latin America. She loves meeting women where they are and walking with them and helping them get closer to God. Her training in this began as the oldest sister of 4 girls. Michelle loves to cook, write, spend time with her family, have a cup of coffee with friends, and travel. Mariko Early has a passion for sharing the Word of God with other women. She is a born encourager and feels a responsibility to encourage as many women as possible to commit their lives to God and to trust in the promises that He has given them. Because she has witnessed His divine power at work in her own life on many occasions, Mariko is totally excited to share the stories of His love, grace, favor, and mercy with other women who are hungry for the fresh hope that living in Christ brings. Mariko has been a keynote speaker on many occasions for women's conferences, workshops, and retreats. She is a motivational speaker and is currently an independent sales director with Mary Kay Cosmetics. She is also the founder of the She Believes 3 women's ministry and SheBelieves3.org blog site where she posts devotions for women. Mariko and her husband Harold have just recently celebrated 25 years of marriage. The two of them also share a passion for working with married couples and are facilitators of a dynamic marriage course, which they have been teaching for the past 14 years. They have been blessed with a beautiful daughter who also enjoys serving God and encouraging others. When it comes to hobbies and fun things to do, she enjoys reading, journaling, watching movies, traveling, decorating, and family time. She loves the arts and all genres of music, especially gospel and jazz. But her greatest joy is encouraging women to live lives that will bring God honor and glory, whether it is in the workplace or at home, by motivating them to use every ounce of their God-given abilities to serve Him by serving others. We'll hear from Michelle first.
Good morning. Or should I say buenos dias? I am so honored to be able to be a part of this program this weekend. And as we have already experienced last night and as we will today, it is such a blessing to know and understand how to love in so many different ways and across so many different cultures. I'm going to take that one. Thank you so much, Sherry. For me, that love has become a lot deeper, and I've gotten to know it a lot more in the Latina culture. But if I call it love in the Latina culture, you don't get the full flavor of amor in the Latina culture. It's the same love that we have from God, but it kind of takes on a lot of different forms. As Brenda alluded to last night, there are even different ways to say you love something. In English, we say, I love pizza. I love my niece and nephew. I love to be able to be here with you today. Well, there are different ways of saying it in Spanish. And the first time I ever went into Latin America, I was warned about how loving these Latino guys might be. There was not a single one that somebody didn't try and set me up with. I'm still single. But I have learned a lot about the way that God shows His love across so many different cultural dynamics. But there's one story I have to tell you about those Latino guys. One of them was Venezuelan. People had tried to set us up for years. We were very good friends. He came to the States, and we were talking, and there were a bunch of us there at the house that night. Hispanics, North Americans, gringos, all the different terms that you want to put on those things. There were even some from Brazil that spoke Portuguese. So we're there chatting, and everybody's in different parts of the house, and he and I are in the living room chatting. We're sitting on the couch, and he's explaining about how things here in the United States are so different. You pump your own gas. You know how to pump gas? Yes, I know how to pump gas. There are so many things that are so different. And where are the people? Well, they all kind of stay in their houses a little bit more than everybody just being out on the street and talking to everybody and greeting everybody. And he said, yeah, I miss these greetings. I need that like physical contact. And you know how in a room, about every so often, all of a sudden, everything just goes really quiet? Yeah, it was that moment. And he said it loud enough for everyone in the house to hear. What I really need is a kiss. I quickly and loudly answered, yes, it's amazing how the greetings in Latin America are very different from how they are here. That physical contact, that dynamic culture. In Venezuela, they're known even more for their flair with that. Some of the other cultures are a little more subdued because each country has its own personality in those ways. And since Iron Rose Sister Ministries' purpose is to equip women to connect to God and one another more deeply, part of what I want to do this morning is equip you to connect to Latina women more deeply. So I'm going to share a lot of different facts and figures and stories and things because I want you to understand the dynamic of what is right across the street. And if you're going to understand anything about the Latina culture, you've got to understand el amor de la abuela. I've already told you what amor means, right? Love. What is abuela? Grandma. Who loves grandma's cookies? Or any kind of grandma's cooking? How many of you are glad that your mom doesn't cook like grandma because, somebody else learned better? There may be some of those too, right? But there is a dynamic in the Latino culture that's this crazy dynamic. And if you want to take notes, I did make another handout for you. It's in the left side of your packet. And at the top it says Love in the Latina Culture. So I've got some of this on there, and then you can fill in some other gaps with notes that you'd like to take. But there's an interesting dynamic with a machista culture that is also matriarchal. What? The machista means that the guy is all in charge and he's got it and it's what he says goes. But everybody knows that it's grandma that really gets it done. It's kind of like in that movie, My Big Fat Greek Wedding, when the man is the head but the woman's the neck. There's some of that dynamic going on, and it makes it very interesting in preaching the gospel and in teaching those that are from this type of cultural background. The Catholic influence is predominant across Latin America, but you also have a much higher percentage of women and children in the churches than you do men. I'm making some very broad strokes because as Bree and others were saying yesterday, or as my mom likes to say, who's a special ed teacher, if you've met one autistic child, you've met one autistic child. If you've met one Latino, you've met one Latino. But there are some broad strokes that we're going to paint to be able to understand and explain some of what are some of the dynamics in the culture. And one of those dynamics is the Latin lover who honors a woman with his last name, but that doesn't mean that he is faithful to her. It means that he has other women on the side. And culturally, for many, that's considered okay. That's part of where that machista culture comes in. But that's also why the matriarchal culture is a part of that dynamic. Because if you have a man that is not solidly there and committed to that family, then mom and grandma have to take care of everything. Now, I know many very strong Christian Hispanic men that break that pattern and that mold because of their commitment to Christ. But that is one of the cultural things that they are fighting against. Many of these men have not had the opportunity to experience or to witness or to have an example of a solid Christian man who is committed to and leading his family as God has designed.
And so when we're talking with and working with, and I can be really loud, but we may need to change the battery. Yep, battery. We'll let somebody take care of that. But as those men and women and those dynamics play out, it is important to understand those things and those aspects of the culture in order to be able to equip them for Scripture. When you know where somebody is coming from, you know how to meet them where they are and walk with them one step closer to God. And it's not because you're trying to paint a gringo model of family, but it's because you are,
Thank you so much. It's not because you're trying to give them a view of what the gringo model of family, because how many dysfunctional gringo families do you know? Yeah, that's because I'm trying to raise all my hands and all my toes and everything, right? When I moved to Venezuela, I worked with all Venezuelans. I did not go down with the North American team. That was a choice that I made and a commitment that I made because I wanted it to be about supporting them and building them up. I didn't want to go in and plant a North American church. Was that tough? Yes, sometimes it was. Was it a blessing? Hugely so. And I know that's not even a word, but you get it. Understanding how important things like food and family are in the Latino culture helps facilitate so much about what God teaches. There are some things that we here in the U.S. can learn from the Hispanic culture, how much they value family. As Brenda mentioned last night, when you're going to get together to hang out for a meal, it's not, okay, we got here, we ate, okay, bye. If you invite somebody over for a meal, you probably have not even started preparing it yet. Because part of the sharing the meal together is hanging out in the kitchen and chopping it up and getting it going and letting it simmer and drinking that cup of coffee and then still talking and hanging out, and it's awesome. So don't you see that there are things that we can each learn from each other, and that focus on food and familia is so key. But when we look at familia, there are some companies, even here in the U.S., that have started to understand that it's not just a Spanish language thing, it's a Spanish culture thing. I'm going to give you an example with Disney. They have started marketing Disney Familia. And even in their promotions, book ahora, which means now, to enjoy a vacation at Walt Disney World. I don't know about you, but when my familia hears the word vacaciones, you can even recognize it, even if you don't know what that means. Everyone from abuelos to tios, tías, and primos, uncles, aunts, and cousins, start packing right away. When's the last time you took a vacation with your extended family? Or even your immediate family? Family is so important. There are some things we can learn from the Latino culture in the focus on family. There are some things we can learn from the Latino culture in food. Did you know that not all Latinos eat tacos? Not all Latinos like spicy food? They don't all put the picante on there? They don't all want the chiles? When I moved to Venezuela, the preacher that I worked with said he was allergic to pepper. He wasn't. He just thought he was. He got to where he really liked my cooking. I grew up in Louisiana. Come on, you gotta have a little kick. But not all Latinos eat tacos. When I am teaching sometimes about John 6 and Jesus being the bread of life, I like to say Jesus is the tortilla of life. Jesus is the arepa of life. Jesus is the pupusa of life. Jesus is the baleada of life. And if you don't know what any of those things are, come ask us. He is that sustenance, that thing that we all know and recognize. It is true that here in the U.S., About 63% of the Hispanic population is from Mexico. But just as not all Latinos eat tacos, not all Latinos are from Mexico. Puerto Rico, Central America, South America, Cuba, Dominican Republic, and other. And did you know that those that are from Spain are not Latinos? They're not from Latin America. And some of you are over here nodding, and some of you are going, yes! This is what we want to know and to understand and to have a better grasp on, equipping ourselves so that we can connect more to God and to one another. So, how many of you here think that the term Hispanic is what should be used? Don't worry, this isn't a test. How many of you think Latino is the word that should be used? How many of you think Latinx is the term? How many of you have even heard of the term Latinx? Hispanic and Latino are used quite interchangeably. Often Hispanic refers to the language and Latino refers to the culture, if you had to make a broad stroke generalization on that. And Latinx is the politically correct way of trying to get away from having to say Latino, Latina, and being more gender neutral. But the Latinos say, that doesn't even work in Spanish, Latinx, okay? And so it's not a term that you hear as much within the Latino community. But with the population trends in the U.S., we see a lot more Hispanic congregations in some of our local churches. How many of you in here come from a congregation where you have an Hispanic group that meets there with your church? Awesome. Are you in a separate? How many of you are they're in a separate building? How many of you it's a separate service time? How many of you it's a bilingual service or that kind of a context? Cool, still some hands. There are a lot of different ways to play that out, and I highly recommend many of the resources that Dr. Dan Rodriguez from Pepperdine University has. His book is mentioned in the recommended books at the end of the notes for this class. But one of the ways that he and others term it is that Hispanic and Latino are pan-ethnic. They go across all the different spectrums of that, but country of origin is preferred. As you heard Brenda mention last night, does anybody remember what country she said she's from? Yes! Y'all can stare, friends. Country of origin is preferred because remember, not all Latinos eat tacos. You don't want somebody to just say, if you're from Arkansas, and someone says, oh, you're from Texas, right? That's the big state in the U.S. And you're like, mm-mm. It's that kind of a pride, but even to a greater degree because there's more diversity within and amongst those countries than you can maybe even imagine. So you have first-generation Latinos. They are foreign-born, and they're an immigrant generation. And while there is still a high percentage of that generation or that dynamic here in the U.S., we are seeing more and more second-generation and third-generation Latinos. With second generation, they're usually born here in the U.S., and for many of them, they are more comfortable speaking and reading in English, even though culturally they are way more comfortable in a Latino culture. So what does that mean for our churches? It means that we need some things that we've learned from them focusing on family. It means we need some things that are honoring the love of food. That could be a little easier, right? Because this is not our grandma's USA. Not our grandma's or abuela's USA. Our world has expanded. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, in 2017, Hispanics made up 17.8% of the population in the United States. It's expected to account for 26.5% of the U.S. population by 2060. The number of U.S.-born Hispanics is growing more quickly than the number of Hispanic immigrants, which is what I just mentioned. The median age of Hispanics is younger than that of the United States population because Hispanics have, in general, more children than a traditional gringo family has. So you're also seeing that kind of the population shift. And even though there are the U.S. states and the regions of the country that have a very high Hispanic population, that is not exclusively where it is. Arkansas is not the state with one of the fewest or lowest populations of Hispanics. When we say that not all Latinos are foreign born, just look at the Senate. When we look at how we have that perspective and that perception, we've got to get away from an us versus them mentality. When we make those broad strokes of categorization, we can't even do that here in saying, oh, it's how we all deal with church and deal with the Hispanic culture amongst first generation and immigrant populations. Because look at how many we have that are now U.S. born that are more comfortable speaking English but in the Latino culture. And their abuela would say, no, you better learn that Spanish. We have to know someone's story. Another book that I mentioned in the resources, it's an example of narrative journalism. And the book is called Just Like Us, The True Story of Poor Mexican Girls Coming of Age in America. It's written by the ex-wife of the former mayor of Denver. Denver's population, it's where I worked in English and Spanish-speaking church plants. About a third or more of the population in Denver is Hispanic. And I'm not going to get into legal or illegal, but just so that you can kind of get an example of some stories, this does a great job of narrating from a very objective way the story of 4 girls who are nearing graduation and what options they do and don't have based on their circumstances. Only 17% of Hispanics have a favorable image of the church, Catholic or Protestant. And while Catholicism is so culturally relevant in what is the dynamic there across Latin America, there are way more evangelical churches across Latin America than there used to be. And so you can't just assume, oh, you're Catholic. Oh, your family was Catholic. That's an incorrect assumption. So what is our response? Well, did you realize that the first convert in Europe was actually an immigrant? Lydia was from Thyatira, which is Asia. And she was a woman. Open our hearts, our minds, our doors, and our churches. There is so much that we have to learn. There is so much that we also have to offer. And if you notice what I was mentioning about the population trends, we have tremendous opportunity in children's ministry, youth ministry, and women's ministry. Those are our inroads for the gospel to reach the Hispanic population here in the U.S. And the more we can learn about the Latina culture, the more we can cross those bridges and build those bridges. So how do we share the Amor? Well, one way is that actually Hispanics are the most active ethnic group on social media and are more likely to own a smartphone. If you go down to Latin America, you may have a very run-down, dilapidated house, but they're going to have a TV. And you may not have the money for other things, but you're going to have a smartphone. What does that mean? It means that connecting and even following and making friends on social media amongst your Latina friends will help you learn a lot about the culture. Will help you build those friendships and relationships. Now don't go home and say, now Michelle Goff gave me permission to be on Facebook all the time. That is not what I'm saying. But if you're going to be on those different social media platforms, it is a great opportunity to get to know and to understand the Latina culture. Also, food, fun, fellowship, and familia. Doesn't get better than that. Ask someone what is a local dish and ask them to teach you to make it. How awesome would that be? There are so many opportunities that we have to connect because it really is all about relationship. Relationship with God and relationship with one another. And at Iron Rose Sister Ministries, that is what we are all about, equipping you to connect to God and one another more deeply. So I'm going to close with one more way you can help make that happen. And that is with the Bible studies that we offer. They are authored in both languages, which means they're culturally sensitive and linguistically applicable. So you can have women that are studying them in each language, and they can be on the same page. Because I don't know about you, if any of you have experience in more than one culture, you can find a great book or a great study or whatever, and you're like, okay, but are they going to understand that analogy? Is that example going to apply? Well, with our books, because I author them in both languages, I don't just translate them, you know they're going to. You can trust that. And it's going to take us all back to the Word and unite us in Christ. They are also available in both languages, which means that it can be a second language learning opportunity. Let's Start Talking type programs use these kinds of materials, but these are designed for women's small group Bible studies. There's a group in Tampa, Florida, that a couple of the Spanish-speaking women have started coming to the ladies' Bible class on the sacred hour of Tuesday morning. Because the women are studying their book in English, there are a couple of ladies that have the book in Spanish, and then they all participate and discuss together, and the ladies are there asking them questions, and the ladies are learning English, and it's awesome. So many opportunities for outreach and for a multi-generational group of Latinas. So let me paint you a picture of that, and I've got actually a picture in a moment, but since the materials are in both languages, and I told you about like the first, second, and third generation Latinas, so like in a small group Bible study, you can have the abuela, who may or may not even be able to read, but she is much more comfortable in Spanish. And she is set in her ways and may not ever learn much English. But she has her book in Spanish. And she's there with her daughter, or the mom, who is Spanish speaking, may or may not read in Spanish, may or may not read in English, depending on what age she was when she came here to the U.S. And then you've got the granddaughter, or the daughter, who understands some Spanish because la abuela was going to make sure of that. But she is much more comfortable reading and speaking in English because that's how she's been going to school, that's where her friends are, and that's where life is. But they are all able to be on the same page in the study. And with that focus on family, that multi-generational is another thing we can learn a lot from. So this is a picture of some of those ladies doing that in Denver, Colorado. It is all about relationship. And I hope and pray that this morning you have been equipped a little bit more to connect to God and one another more deeply, especially connecting to others from the Latina culture. God bless you, and if you have more questions, we're going to continue this in a very conversational way during one of the breakout classes, so I invite you to join us. And we're going to be in 210, which is down on that end of the hall, if you'd like to find out more and learn more about Amor and the Latina culture. Thank you, and God bless.